This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
The Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
As Steve noted in his presentation, Bisher survived extraordinary rendition in 2002 from the Gambia to Afghanistan, where he was imprisoned, interrogated, and tortured at 2 CIA facilities, and then subsequently transferred to Guantanamo. He was released without charge in 2007 and now resides in the UK. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce him. Bisher, why don't you go ahead? We need to keep it quiet just because the audio is not very good, so just be aware that we need to keep the sound down so we can hear everything. Bisher, you can go ahead and start.
Hello, everybody. I think it's good afternoon where you are, or are you still morning time? Thank you very much for inviting me to participate today. And it really is a pleasure seeing you all and seeing some faces who I knew before, like Stephen Soldz. Really, it's a pleasure seeing you all. Thank you very much. 20 minutes or so is, in a way, a long time sitting on this chair. But nevertheless, the experience actually is a very long experience, and it has been a few years. I've just been released. It's been 3 years now since I've been released, and I have to say some of the memories have faded away, but some are still there. And I'll try to take you briefly sort of through things that have happened to me and things I've witnessed in overall. I was traveling on a business trip from the wonderful, wonderful London to the small country in Africa called Gambia, in West Africa, if I remember correctly. And, you know, everything was legitimate. You know, it's a small business. My brother was venturing in Africa. We arrive at the airport and things really start going sour. They hold us, they put us in, you know, in small cells, you know, not very good treatment at all. You know, we have, excuse me for saying, buckets for a toilet and all of that with no explanation. And everything that was happening to us in Gambia was happening in the dark when they're moving us in the dark. Everything is not really official. We couldn't have access to lawyers. We couldn't have access. My brother is a British citizen. He couldn't have access to the British consulate and so on and so forth. And then one day, again, in the middle of the night, they sort of handcuff us, shackle us, blindfold us, and they whip us to the airport. There we are handed over to American agents, probably CIA. At the time, I didn't know. I say probably because at the time I didn't know who they were. But I mean, now we know that they were actually CIA. They put us on a very uncomfortable flight, you know, very harsh treatment, again with no explanation whatsoever. The flight is like the duress that we, myself and my friend Jamil, endured during the flight is really, like really stuff of sort of nightmare. Like very uncomfortable. Nobody tells you anything. You're shackled, bound. You can't see anything. Your ears are covered, and you really don't know what's happening to you. You don't know if you're gonna survive. You're gonna die. It really was, you know, it was something like, you know, which I tried for a very long time, like since I was released, to sort of really not remember these things. You know, I discuss it very rarely, but like now I'm talking about it, and the experience is really heart-pounding. Like, you know, you think you're gonna die, and strangely that was consistent almost throughout, even to the last day when I was released. The consistency that you don't know what's going on. When they're holding you, you don't know what's going on, and when you're being released, you also don't know what's going on. And the level of stress one endures is really, one doesn't wish this to anybody. So from Gambia, we were taken to what's called the dark prison, which incidentally is completely dark, much darker than the conference room. I think you have dimmed the lights from what I can see, but it's pitch dark, like, you know, pitch dark. The guards there, they walk around with very dim torches. Like, you see nothing. The only time you sort of see a little bit of light is when the guard comes to your cell and opens the beanhole and looks at you And, if you don't move, he starts sort of banging. So you move, that's it. He shuts the beanhole, walks away. If you speak with him, he doesn't answer. If you ask him, why am I here, doesn't answer anything you say. If you tell him, I'm dying, he doesn't answer. It's a very extreme situation. People, I heard very strange things happening around me. There was music on 24 hours a day, but you could feel the pain of people surrounding you. When people are taken out for interrogation, they're screaming, they're shouting. Everybody is in pain. Everybody is closed upon himself. You don't know exactly what's going on. And after being in the dark prison for a couple of weeks or so, of course, you can't keep dates. Again, sorry to say, I think the bit on the toilet I'm going to refer to a few times during this conference call, but actually just to reflect what sort of memories I actually have. I don't know what's the problem, but I think the U.S. government seems to have a problem with people going to the toilet, from what I have gone through. But again, you have a small bucket for a toilet, you don't know, you can't clean yourself, you can't shower, you can't take care of yourself, you have insects and rats in your cell, literally no food. I think we were given one meal every 1 or 2 days. Again, it was very, very difficult to keep count of days, really, because there's no day and night, there's nothing, so you just sort of roughly guess. And between me and my friend Jamil, we sort of guessed we were there between 2 or 3 weeks. From the dark prison, we were taken to background. Again, no explanation, no due process, no nothing. Nobody tells you anything. And in background, we were subjected to, quite harsh interrogation. I was myself subjected to sleep deprivation for quite a long time. It's not fun at all, really. It's not fun. And again, I think the main problem is that you really do not understand what is going on. Nobody explains to you. Not necessarily you're right, but why you are here. All I remember is that I was in London. I was settled in London, going on a business trip, and I see myself in the dark prison, and I see myself in background with people, I don't know. Really strange, very, very strange environment. And that continued, even when we were 3 months later taken to Guantanamo, although things in Guantanamo are a bit more open, but nevertheless, I actually learned a new word in comunicado. And I asked, what's that word? I never came across it. My normal vocabulary, I don't really come across, such a word. And it meant in complete isolation, and not in contact with anybody else. And I told at the time my lawyer that it's a very good word, really. The Americans did a very, very good job out of isolating us from the real world. Our senses are not normal. Our behavior became not normal with time and with the experiences that we had. But I think all of that, is generally known, what has gone on in the dark prison or background or even Guantanamo. I think that's really very, very well known. I'd like to, I was then released. Again, I was one of the people, I wasn't really, never my interrogator pointed a finger at me and said, Bisher, you did 1, 2, 3, 4. Really, never. So just interrogation, gathering information, understanding me. That especially became more important when they decided to release me. Well, on just the day before I think I was released, I came face to face with my interrogator, and at the time I had really had enough with everything that's going around me, and I was really becoming non-cooperative, so to speak, with the establishment in Guantanamo. But it appeared that, there was sort of sign that I'm probably, not definitely, probably going to be released. So when my interrogator asked to see me, I was sort of, in a way, forced to sort of go and see him. I went and we spoke, and I said, look, this looks a bit odd. I don't know if it's a game you're playing or something. But he told me, no, probably you're going to be released, Bisher. And we talked a little bit, and one of the questions he asked me, which I think was and continues to be a very, very important question for me, is that, Bisher, what are you going to do with regards to those who are still in prison in Guantanamo? And I told him something. I said, look, Jeremiah, I'm going to do all I can to help them. Really, I'm going to do all I can to help them. And I'm trying very, very hard not to disappoint those overlooking me, if they are overlooking me, and I think they are probably, that the people in Guantanamo and the many thousands others who we do not know exactly where, and the hundreds of individuals who have been released from such prisons, I think this is really my main focus in my life today. This is a very, very important thing for me. And I would like to speak a little bit. I think it's, speaking about my experience, I find a bit dull, really a bit sort of painful, although I'll be very happy to answer your questions later if you have any. But I think I would like to focus more on now and on the future. I think that's very, very important for you guys, for us at Reprieve. I currently work at Reprieve, an organization I got to know in Guantanamo, which represented me, and I'm very, very proud to be working with them, trying to help those who are still in Guantanamo and those who have been released. One of the very strange things I found is that the American government is actually releasing people, which I think to me is a great thing. I'm very, very happy that they are releasing people. However, I am very shocked. No, I don't want to say disappointed. It's not disappointed, but it's a shock. This belief that those individuals who are being released, there is no network of support whatsoever for them. They are released, and a lot of these people are really like, you know, they're released in countries, first of all, which they do not know, because a lot of them, it's not safe for them to go back to their own countries for various reasons I don't need to get into. You probably know a fair bit about that. But being, in a way, thrown in a country with nobody they know, with no family members, with no job prospects, without anything, literally like, you know, just thrown in a city. And that I found to be very, very difficult to grasp with. I am in touch with quite a lot of these individuals who have been released, okay? And, you know, some of them have families in other countries, some of them, you know, have nobody. And to say to you what it means to have a voice they can hear from behind a telephone, like, as I said, Reprieve, like myself and others at Reprieve, who constantly call them and check on them and try to do what we can, really means a lot. And the amount of work that needs to take place to have these people become normal citizens of the country they have been thrown in, the country which have accepted them to be their guests. We have to do a lot to have these people stand up on their own feet, to really prove that they are not terrorists, that they are just normal individuals who want to get on with their life. They're normal individuals, you know, who want to enjoy life. It's unfortunate that the image that has been portrayed to all of us, to the world, that everybody in Guantanamo is a terrorist, everybody in Guantanamo is Mr. Bad. And to look at those who have been released, the vast majority, all they want is for a simple life, and no Ferraris, no posh things. Just really, it's very strange when you leave a place like Guantanamo, when you go through a very difficult experience. I think you no longer strive, you no longer desire all these really, really fancy things. I think people start to accept that, you know, small things in life that really matter. They simplify their lives. Most of the people I know, I'm in touch with, they have simplified their lives. You know, they just want to have a nice family, you know, take care of their family, you know, just live that simple life away from the hecticness of, you know, what's going on around them, especially Guantanamo. But again, unfortunately, there isn't a hand that's been put forward to help them. I myself, I'm a little bit involved with a group of us here in the UK. We've established Guantanamo Justice Center in the hope that we can actually give a helping hand to these individuals who were released. But to my amazement, is that although the launch was quite fanciful, and there was a lot of media coverage and everything, but really the amount of donations that were given towards this cause is, to say pathetic, is a real understatement. I think in total, what the Guantanamo Justice Center was given in absolute total to date, it's been more than 6 months now, is less than the salary of one of you guys sitting in that room. Salary of 1 month less, okay? And that's like, I'm sure you guys are not on, ridiculously high salaries, I think, anyway. And I think for the U.S. as a country and for the world as a whole to say, we don't want terrorists, we don't want this, we want to fight terrorism, and yet, on a very simple experiment, releasing people from Guantanamo, they are not taking any real steps to at least prevent these guys who are supposed to be terrorists from going to the front line, as they say and claim. And I think this must be something at least we put some of the focus on, whether I can't specify which level, but people even like having an operation done, having the family come over. I've just spoken with somebody who actually just before this conference who needs an operation done, okay? And really, myself and my colleague Dr. Free are the only people he can really speak with and tell them like, I desperately need to have an operation done, or possibly I'm going to be a goner, okay? And we at Reprieve as an organization, we're not set up for this sort of thing. Yes, the government of the countries they're in, they are not able to, or they're not willing to give them that very basic health need. Living in a house, living in a very simple flat, that's not provided to a large proportion of the people who have left Guantanamo. Again, I don't want to bring the examples of far too many, but I think on all of us, I think we need to take a stand, and when we say we want to end Guantanamo, it's not a question of simply taking those individuals and putting them somewhere else, and it's not simply taking those individuals and sending them to another country where, well, we can just forget about them. I think we need to set a good and positive example on giving people who have been, I believe, extremely wrongly treated for a very long time, exceeding now 8 years, giving them a start in life, giving them a chance. And I think we should keep an eye on them and let them prove to us that, they are just Mr. Average, honest people who want to make it in life just like all of us. I think they should be given an opportunity to stand on their own 2 feet and just live their lives with their families and spouses and so on and so forth. And I think, this is a very, very important message for me to convey to you. Again, I can speak all you want about all the bad things that have happened to myself and others, whether, the beatings or the pains or the shivering cold or, people screaming because nobody is giving them medication, or people screaming because they're being beaten up, whatever. I can talk about all of that. But I think on top of that, I think we should look for the future. We should look at how we can actually do something positive to build these lives that have been destroyed for over 8 years, to help and build them somewhat. And really, this is, I take this very close to heart, and I have sort of decided that this is really my task in life for the time being, at least, until maybe the day will come, I hope, when we no longer need to speak about these things, when everything is really behind us. And I hope that will happen before too long. I think that's all I have to say about this, and I'm happy to hear from you and if you have any questions.
It's great to be able to introduce Stephen Soldz, who's come here from Boston. Is that correct? Yes. Everyone's coming from all different places. He's the director of the Center for Research, Evaluation, and Program Development at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, where he also teaches and practices as a psychoanalyst, clinical psychologist, and active researcher. His research has focused on problems in psychotherapy, process and outcome, personality processes in development and pathology, substance abuse, and youth tobacco use. He co-edited the book Reconciling Empirical Knowledge and Clinical Experience, the Art and Science of Psychotherapy. He is a co-founder of the Coalition for an Ethical Psychology, which has made international news with its campaign to challenge the participation of psychologists in interrogation and torture. He is the president-elect of Psychologists for Social Responsibility. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Soldz.
I'll also say, relevant to what we just heard from Bisher, I've been a clinical consultant on 2 of the Guantanamo cases who were suffering very severe mental health problems among a whole range of problems. So the personal needs, the needs for mental health aid, for rehabilitation, hit me very personally, having read the medical records of people there, et cetera. First, I want to echo what everyone else has said. I am so thrilled to be here. I'm honored to be with North Carolina Stop Torture Now. They are really leaders in the national movement here at developing this local grassroots level that I hope will take off elsewhere. For the last number of years, I've been talking over and over about psychologists doing bad things, namely psychologists who aided, colluded, provided cover for torture, and sadly to say our professional association, the American Psychological Association, who colluded and provided cover for torture. Today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. Rather than psychologists doing bad things, I'm going to talk about the psychology of doing bad things and the psychology of doing good things. I had some slides, but we're not going to use them so that we don't lose Bisher up here during this. So you're not missing anything. It was just text, so don't worry here. It's important to keep in mind what we confront among the populace. And I think, as a psychologist, what I want to say is I think we need, in some sense, more understanding and tolerance for our fellow citizens who aren't quite as impassioned and as we are. This is sometimes hard for us, but I think if we're going to make progress, we have to be able to think about what's going on with them. Otherwise, we'll stick in a group of about this size, which is a wonderful size, but we would like it to be many times larger. And I think in this particular situation, unlike the successful but long-term accountability projects against torture in Latin America in particular, which have had notable successes after decades, we have an additional problem, which is that the abuses are committed against others, not against U.S. citizens, and against people who are viewed as terrorists, often incorrectly, as the vast majority of people at Guantanamo, as we've been hearing about, who are Muslims, who have alas, not been very popular in this country since at least the Iran crisis of 1980. That we have a fear of terrorism in the population, a fear that has been manipulated but is not completely unfounded. But we also have other things contributing to fears that we have to acknowledge. The major social changes that have been going on and the economic crisis, which has been hitting the majority of the population in this country for decades now, which has exacerbated a sense of social anxiety, which I think has partly gotten focused on this war of terror, this fear of terror. It's easier to be afraid of terror than to be afraid that, you know, things are just falling apart, that you're going to lose your job, that maybe you won't have health care. Maybe we'll get a little improvement in that particular domain. So I think that there's a lot of other aspects that contribute to what's going on among the American populace and what we're confronting. There's I have a whole bunch of slightly disjointed, because there are a million different aspects of this. I can only touch on a couple of them today. And I don't want to claim that this is the story. It would be hours to try and construct a coherent story. I'm trying to, a few points I think are worth making about the psychological issues. So we have here classical psychological mechanisms, us versus them. People seem to be predisposed to make distinctions of this type, the in-group and the out-group. You know, for those of us involved in progressive causes, think of the demonization of the Bush administration among ourselves. You know, the radical hatred expressed there on, say, certain blogs. It's the same dynamic. I do it myself. But it is the same dynamic that we are confronting among our fellow citizens, again, just a different us and a different them. You know, we're doing the projecting too onto those evil others. We confront the desire for retribution among our citizens for 9/11, which is a very deep-seated psychological process. There's also, as all of us who are activists deal with all the time, an avoidance of what makes us uncomfortable. Especially when combined with powerlessness. I know in Boston, when the Iraq War was starting, I founded a little group, Psychoanalysts for Peace and Justice. We had a few wonderful meetings. I got a whole bunch of my colleagues to go to the first anti-war demonstration. But a couple of months later, I was alone. They were like, I can't think about it. I can't read the news. I can't. Abu Ghraib was like, I don't want to talk about it. I can't think about it. And these are my psychoanalytic colleagues who try and get their patients to think about all kinds of horrible, awful things. And they were saying, I can't think about it. Well, if they can't, then, you know, it's not that strange that many of our citizens can't. And we have to keep that in mind. We have to have some empathy for them and for the challenges that they face in trying to deal with this. And I think the ways in which we talk have to reflect that. And then there's, as part of this, is a massive social denial and institutional denial. I have been confronting it for the last number of years in the American Psychological Association, where at one level there is collusion, but among the large majority of membership, including the progressive, socially liberal membership, there is this massive social denial. As Stanley Cohen, a sociologist who studied social denial, said, many institutions, and I think of the APA, but you can think of the law associations, you can think of, we all have our own, many institutions are full of people who do not have inquiring minds, who simply don't ask. You know, this was originally formulated in terms of the people who lived near the camps, who saw the trains go in, who smelled the things, and says, I never know what was going on there. I never asked. You know, I mean, what was that ash? So I want to talk about one psychological theory that provides one angle to understanding some of this. And it's one that's not very well known. It has extensive empirical foundations with hundreds of research studies. And I think it is very illuminating. You know, this is, again, only a partial. All theories in psychology are partial. But I think it's an important one. Something called terror management theory. And this postulates that terror is the terror of death. That humans, because we're conscious, are uniquely among the animal kingdom aware that we can die. And yet, in some sense, we can't really comprehend that, the ceasing of existence. That this induces a terror in us that we try very hard to avoid. And so ways in which we do that, we construct cultural worldviews to help us avoid this terror of death. So we develop beliefs about the nature of reality that infuse life with meaning. Religions, for example. But not just religions. We that give a sense of value. We try and think of ourselves as valued creatures. We're not just, in things that are just going to become dust someday. That give a sense of people as distinct from nature. Help us psychologically elude death. So, for example, we seek to live on through our children. The great, as one of my supervisors expressed years ago, identification with the successor. We teach, we mentor, and it's a form of sort of that helping us to live on past our things. We create art, we create books. Why do we put all that energy into it? At some level, we think this is going to live on. We're going to live on. So one of the things that the terror management folks have learned is that when death anxiety is aroused, but especially when it's aroused, but it's not in the front of our minds, technical language, out of focal awareness, that it leads us to reinforce our core cultural worldviews so that you get an emphasis on values and uniqueness, unfortunately, of our own culture. For example, enhanced patriotism. Think of what happened after 9/11. You tend to get, in most people, and I'll talk in a minute, the exceptions, a greater intolerance for those different than us, even in minor ways. And they have done study after study that demonstrates this in all kinds of ways. Judges will, for example, post much higher bail when this death anxiety is aroused for prostitutes than they would when they're not under death anxiety. And we have a greater belief that others think just like we do. So let me just give two brief examples of studies on this. There are hundreds of them. One of them is a laboratory study. Psychologists, I've never done one of these. I always say I should do a laboratory study someday in my career. But liberal and conservative students were given a task of administering hot sauce, which is a very unpleasant but not ultimately that harmful thing. So it's the kind of thing that these social psychologists think of. And they're paired with someone else who is either liberal or conservative, either is matched ideologically with them or is discrepant ideologically with them. And so when they're not under death anxiety, there's no difference in whether they give how much hot sauce they give to the person who thinks like them or the person who thinks differently than them. But when this death anxiety is aroused, which you have them write a little essay about their death, and then you give them various things to get it out of focal awareness so they're not actually thinking about it. When that's aroused, they give more than twice as much hot sauce to those who think differently than them than they do to those who think like them. So they have dozens and dozens of studies. But so here's another one in the real world, not in the laboratory, to show that it's not just an artifact of these lab things. People are interviewed in front of a funeral parlor, death anxiety, or 100 meters, 300 feet away. And this has been done in Germany, where they're asked about attitudes toward immigration. How much of the populace, what do you think about immigration? How much of people agree with you? And they find in front of the funeral parlor, people estimate that a much higher percentage of the population agrees with whatever their position is than they do simply 300 feet away. And the same thing was done in Colorado Springs and an issue that was very salient there, which is whether Christian values should be taught in the schools. In front of the funeral parlor, many more people seem to agree with me when I'm under this death anxiety simply aroused by being in front of a funeral parlor than when I'm not. Okay. So what factors mitigate this death anxiety? Because here's a bit of a lesson for us. In their research, one of these is extremely liberal ideology. And I'm not sure, they haven't done enough research. I don't think liberal is exactly the right characteristic there. That's how they did it. But that those with extreme liberal ideologies showed a greater liking for attitudinally dissimilar people in the mortality salience condition than for people who were like them. So they went exactly the opposite direction. And they showed an increased valuing of tolerance because that was part of their core value system. And so, I mean, I think on 9/11, I felt this great desire to go protect the mosque because I knew there were going to be attacks on mosques. I'm in Boston. You know, it was a very crazy time there. One of the planes took off. There were raids of in hotels a few blocks from my office. Another mitigating factor is a strong belief in symbolic immortality of various types: religious, spiritual, biological. I live on through my children or my tribe. Creative, through art, literature, science teaching, etc. For various reasons, I won't go into the details of theoretically high self-esteem, considering myself to be an important, valued person is viewed by these theorists as a defense against this death anxiety, and those who are securely attached to others, to other people, are mitigating factors from these effects of death anxiety. Now I want to switch gears to a different topic, which is some research that's been done on rescuers. And most of this research has been done on those in occupied Europe in World War II who helped Jews. But I think we had an example with Edward Horgan today of some of these dynamics. I asked his permission to use this case example, so we'll see. I was struck by how many of the points were illustrated. And I knew one of these rescuers. She was one of our psychoanalysts at our school, and it was very, well, I'll refer to that in a minute. So what's been found is that those who rescued, because I think that's tend to view all humanity as one, have no or less rigid boundaries between us and them. As Mr. Horgan said, an Iraqi or an Afghan child is worth as much as my grandchildren. You know, most people actually wouldn't say that. Or they may say it, but they wouldn't really feel it. So they feel connected to other human beings in a very deep way. Now, also have a sense of social marginality of some type. Being a member of a minority group of some type, being new to a community, having immigrant parents, being a minority religion, etc. This helps in two ways. It helps identify with the despised other. You know, like I was the only Jew in school, and you had kids running around, "You killed our Lord, you killed our Lord." And you kind of get a sense I don't quite fit in, and you know, maybe I should be paying attention to other people who don't quite fit in, like the Cuban student who you weren't supposed to hang out with. And there also, it builds an inoculation factor about less caring about what people think. They have a sense of efficacy, an ability to act and influence the world that counters the hopelessness and helplessness that so many feel. And I think Mr. Horgan showed this, have a sense of adventure, as he, the look on his face when he described going to the airport and creating trouble. Not all do, but some do. Oskar Schindler, Schindler's List, for example. And have a very strong value system, but it's important to remember that others also have strong value systems. That values, it depends on what the values are. Having a strong value system is not necessarily protection, and many of those people who we fight so hard against also have very strong value systems. So where are we? It's not surprising that people resist thinking about and acting against torture and rendition. These topics, as well as the general climate of fear going on, arouse the death anxiety, among other dynamics, which leads to a strengthening of conventional views and enhances negative attitudes towards the outgroup, toward despised others. So these are natural dynamics. So steps to take. One is steps to try and reduce the fear in our society. I mean, we know that fear has been artificially manipulated in the last years. I think, however, we have failed to create a counter-narrative that can reduce that fear, that can help people get a sense of terrorism is another one of those dangers that we have to live with, because it isn't going away, at least not in the near future. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think that should be one of the things that we aim at. increased tolerance as a value. Because remember, under death anxiety, you get an activation of your real core values. So if tolerance is more of a core value for people, things work out differently. It's very essential to do things to humanize detainees, to humanize Muslims. You know, after all, Muslims have children that they care about too. You know, Mom, imagine if your child were kidnapped, deported. This is a great example that out there and got there. And connect acting against abuse to symbolic immortality. I think we have to find better ways of connecting our work to creating a better world for our children and grandchildren. That we, you know, I don't think the progressive forces have been very good at doing this. And I think that that's one, and also on trying to make the argument, which is made sometimes, but I don't think we've been that successful about, that we're acting on values that we hold dear. So there's also the question then of the public officials that you're trying to get to act. And, you know, says what you need to look for some special folks. You know, your average person, you ain't going to get them to do anything these times. You need those with a strong, liberal ideology, but I'm not sure it's really liberal. You need those people who have, because I think some libertarians may have this, who have that strong ingrained values of tolerance, who are somewhat socially marginal. So you may, in some cases, do better with people who are from minority groups of various types, those who have strong connections to others, who are willing to go against the grain. There aren't that many that make it, but there are some. And those whose religious or beliefs truly held emphasize acceptance of all humanity. And I want to end with, for all of us, I think that acceptance of all humanity means realizing that we have more in common with our opponents than we may realize. As a Dutch man who rescued Jews from the Nazis at great danger to himself, told researcher Kristen Monroe, "You should always be aware that every other person is basically you. Always treat people as though it is you. That goes for evil Nazis as well as for Jewish friends in trouble. Always see yourself in those people, for good or evil, both." Because I know I can find in myself the desire to hurt, the desire to dominate, and I think we are challenged to acknowledge those in ourselves so that we can have more empathy for the people who do the horrific things that we're doing and find ways to talk to some of them and to talk to others. Okay, thank you.
I'm thinking of the experiments that have been done with people who were torturing other people. Actually, I'm thinking specifically of the electrocution experiment.
Yeah, the Milgram experiment.
Milgram, that's the name.
Authority, yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have any insights on how to create a society that learns to recognize as individuals when they're being set up to do evil things and to find ways to take steps to protect themselves as well as others and the society as a whole.
I think it's always a work in progress. You know, those studies were replicated many times. It's certainly helping people to be more questioning of authority can be, and more skeptical can be helpful. How protective it is, it's only protective somewhat. We know, for example, that depending on the conditions in which he did the studies, when it was done at the university, he had a much higher rate of acquiescence in this than when he did it in a shady part of town with a dirty lab coat looking like a shady doctor. People were much more skeptical. He had, did we get it? and they did not do much. About 20 to 30% generally did not cooperate. One of the problems we have is that these studies were considered to be so ethically questionable that replicating them has generally not been allowed since then. In the last year or two, people have developed some model that now meets the standards for, it's sort of odd, the standards for informed consent in research arose partly out of those studies because they were considered potentially so devastating to people that they have not been replicated until the last year or two. And partly because of an us-them dynamic. In psychology, there's been tension between social psychologists who emphasize the power of the situation on people, the situation of an authority telling you, and personality psychologists who say that there's some inherent dispositions in people to do one way or another way. These two groups have been at war. They share a Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. They've been fighting each other for the last 40 years. So therefore, the social psychologists who emphasized the situation there weren't interested in the characteristics of the refusers. And so we had this us-then dynamic actually kept us from learning very much about this. We think that some of these characteristics that were identified were there, which are then, it's like, how do we increase those? I think we'll only do it so much. I think all societies have different range of things, so we have to also find social structures that emphasize the willingness to refuse, et cetera, and also certain constraints on mob behaviors in some sense. But do I have any clear answers? No. Yeah. Okay, we got him.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, but I've just not hearing you, so really I've missed the last few minutes.
Okay. I just want to, thank you, and then ask you if you can tell us anything about what you think makes the difference in terms of resilience for torture survivors and recovery, and also any thoughts on how communities seeking social justice can best support survivors as an integral part of that struggle for justice.
That sounds a bit complicated. Let me tell you this. I think to survive an experience like this, it's not the muscles that count. It's not, how tough you are or what, how rich you are or what all of these, in a way, things that we in normal life give great importance to. You could have somebody like spending, 8-hour shifts in the gym and, big guys, tough guys, apparently. But I think surviving an experience like this is sort of being content and simplifying your life, your desires, and keeping hope. Keeping hope that, one day I will see my family, one day things will be better. And it's really, I think, it's sort of like in here. It's in here, it's inside of you. Have a dream and don't let that, guy behind the bars, and that's of course the other side, with the sort of stick, so to speak. Don't let him beat you into submission. Don't let him take your dreams away. Don't let him take your life away. They can sort of they can beat you, not give you food, they can starve you, they can take your blanket, your bed, everything. But they can't take what's in here. They can't take your dreams. And I think, I kept mine, and I still keep them till now. As to, in terms of society, I didn't quite understand the question. Could you kind of to repeat the latter part of your question?
Yes, I just asked how can communities working for justice best work with survivors of torture in a way that's mutually complementary?
I think there has to be a lot of sensitivity. Really, I judge myself was in Guantanamo and looking back at the first year or so of my release. Really, I have to say, like in front of all of you, I wasn't normal. I wasn't a normal person in terms of my thoughts, my behavior, my reaction to other people. For example, I would walk in the streets of London, and if I was to see somebody making any move, which is really very normal, I would feel really threatened, and I would feel the adrenaline running in me, and like I'm preparing myself for a fight. And I kept telling myself that really there's nothing like this. This is no longer Guantanamo. And people dealing with individuals who have been released from very harsh experiences must bear that in mind, not to humor the individual or think that they're gone mad or anything, but just be courteous, maybe a bit more than normal, be sensitive, because also, like one would see probably mood swing, something you would say, which may be sort of fairly normal, one would sort of maybe view in a hostile way. And these are things which I think personal experiences, like you start, you'd have your first experience and tread really carefully, and I think you would build upon your own experience and what are the sensitive issues. For example, we're dealing with somebody who's really sensitive about an illness he has. And I was just speaking with my colleague, is that we don't really care, so to speak, what illness he had. We want to arrange for him to have a suitable treatment. So the doctor will know. We really don't need to know. I'm not interested in what he has. If he doesn't want to tell me, it doesn't matter. I don't need to sort of keep banging on it. Oh, what has he got? What has he got? No, let me just work on the solution, even by a third-party doctor, where usually the patient is much more willing to speak about his problem, rather than me at the office. I know what he has, And this is something we have to know. Sometimes, maybe it's human nature that we really push at a particular point or for a particular point which we have more interest than usual. And really we shouldn't do that. We'll ask a question once. If we got an answer, that's good. If we didn't get an answer, I say, well, maybe he didn't hear me. And I'll put it in a very nice and mild way again. And if I don't get an answer, I will definitely not ask again. That's it. That question is out of the list. So just being sensitive, being supportive, and really practical help. I think practical help, because the individuals have real problems. And if I keep speaking on the end of the line for 100 hours and 100 days, and I haven't moved forward with with that individual, then really I haven't done anything. Like we're going to pay this bill on the phone, and I've wasted 100 hours, and he feels dead frustrated, and no progress. So I think somewhat less speaking and real action. For example, medical care, okay, that's it. Arrange for medical care. Dental care, arrange for dental care. Some people may need psychological help, where although that's actually, you would find that that's among the most sensitive issues. Because nobody going out, leaving Guantanamo or anywhere else for that matter, would want to admit that, they've got a problem. I think I'm among the few who seriously realize that I have a problem, and I'm sort of having that taken care of. But generally, it's among the most difficult issues. And I think even maybe in normal life, admitting that, gosh, I have a problem, up here. So, yeah. So just practical, real help, real solution. And if you can't do something, and if you can't do it, never ever promise. Really, don't promise, because nobody's forcing you to promise. So don't promise anything. If it's in your hand, say, I'm going to give it to you. And if it's not, say, no promises.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have to move on. So if everyone could maybe stand and thank Bisher for being with us and for being so open. And please give him a big hand.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.